Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and thanks for joining us. Well, there are staff shortages everywhere in our society, and the teacher shortage will impact our society for decades. But first, how about this? Roads and bridges and the state police in Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania in the Georgia indictment of Donald J. Trump. Let's get to it.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
All right, joining me is Stephen Caruso. He's the Capitol reporter for Spotlight PA, and Tom Lehman. He also covers the Capitol for WGAL News 8. All right, let me start with you, Tom. I'll tell you what, all week, this past week in the news, it was about Pennsylvanians in the Georgia indictment of Donald J. Trump. I mean, it was one story after another, and I know you covered it. What's the latest?
Well, Terry, I think when you look at the indictment itself, and you see that Pennsylvania is mentioned, I think 40-something times during that particular in that particular document, I should say.
98 pages or something like that, right?
Right. I mean, just to see Pennsylvania show up in there so many times. And what prosecutors sort of outlined in the indictment is how former President Trump, a lot of the people who were also named in that indictment, they're accused of essentially putting a lot of pressure on legislative leaders. Brian Cutler, then Speaker of the House here in Pennsylvania, Jake Corman, former Senate President pro tem, trying to get them to at least hear the president out on trying to make some moves to possibly overturn the election results.
With fake electors?
Correct. And that is one of the big focuses in that document, is just the sheer effort that prosecutors say was happening to try to change the election results in favor of the former president.
Yeah. And no Pennsylvanian was indicted, correct?
I think one Philadelphia political operative named Mike Roman, if I'm getting that name right, who was indicted because he ran field for the Trump campaign down in Georgia. But, you know, it's interesting in Pennsylvania.
But no Pennsylvania official.
Yeah, no state elected official, no top Republicans. But what's interesting is that, you know, there was a slate of those so-called fake electors here in Pennsylvania, 17 of them, including Lou Barletta, the former gubernatorial candidate, Sam DeMarco, the GOP chair in Allegheny County, but they're actually escaping prosecution, and that's mostly because when they signed the alternate electors form they had, they put a line on it that basically said, also, none of this will be legal if a court doesn't find that we're the real electors. And legal experts that Spotlight PA talked to, this is a great story by my colleague Carter Walker, basically said that is the way to do this. You know, they didn't try to put themselves forward as the right electors. They just said, we're here in case the court says, and just in case the court decides to step in and say, actually, Pennsylvania ran its election wrong.
Yeah, well, the Vice President Mike Pence would have nothing to do with fake electors, correct?
Oh, no, I mean, I think that was certainly very clear. And it's interesting when you look at the timeline of all of this. It starts essentially, prosecutors outlined with a text message from Mark Meadows, former White House Chief of Staff, to Scott Perry, asking him for cell phone numbers for legislative leaders. And then we have the hearing in Gettysburg.
That's Congressman Scott Perry, by the way.
Correct. There's Congressman Perry, and then eventually this continues to snowball. We get to the Gettysburg hearing, which was highly publicized at the time. Senator Doug Mastriano, a big organizer for that. He was not named in the indictment anywhere, certainly not facing charges, but
some of them were election deniers, meaning that Donald J. Trump really won the election. Is that correct?
In terms of who was charged, yes, certainly, or will be facing charges, I should say.
Yeah. All right, let's run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about roads and bridges. We've got a huge state. We've got a lot of old roads and old bridges, and there's always a discussion about the funding for that and where that money ultimately ends up. We'll do that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, Pennsylvania is a very large, complicated state when it comes to the problems with roads and bridges. We have cities, we have suburbs, and I'll ask you this, Stephen, a lot of mountains and roads that have to, and bridges that go through and cover those mountains, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like everything, if there's something that Pennsylvania can relate to no matter where we are, is hitting a pothole and cursing the heavens. So, road and bridge funding in Pennsylvania is something that is always a hot issue in Harrisburg. How do we get more money for it? And, in this budget, lawmakers think they've actually found a way to get about $500 million in extra money going to those repairs. So to explain, it's that, every time we go to the pump and pay a gas tax, that money is supposed to go to fixing roads and bridges. That's kind of the general deal. That's actually even in the kind of state constitution. It's set up this motor license fund where all that money gets dumped, plus vehicle fees. But state lawmakers for decades have been taking money from that fund, the gas tax revenue, and putting it to cover the state police. Now, this makes some sense because, everyone agrees we need a state police force. They also police our roads. They catch speeders. They do all of that. So it's made sense. But, every dollar that goes to state police from gas tax is money that's not going to infrastructure. And those transfers of gas tax revenue to state police have gotten really high in recent years. We're talking, they touched $700 million last decade, and they've gotten it down to $500 million because they realize it's a problem. But that's still every year over year. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of road and bridge projects that aren't being done.
Right.
Especially with federal money being spent on these issues. Like usually the feds require the state to put some money up to get that. So lawmakers this year, they've finally set up a plan to try and get rid of those transfers and save more of those gas tax dollars for road and bridge.
Yeah, over the years, this has been a big story covered throughout the state and certainly on this show. And some of my guests have made the point, look, fund the state police, but don't take the money for the needs that we have for roads and bridges.
Right, and I think the argument that a lot of people have made is simply, listen, we have this massive infrastructure system in Pennsylvania with our roads that have to be fixed, they have to be maintained, and this money was always intended for this purpose. We should make sure it is actually being used for that purpose. And I think when you look at the alternate solutions, when you look at what people have had to come up with, I think the most recent thing that comes to mind is that aborted plan to toll a bunch of bridges to either replace them or rehab them.
Right.
When you look at that situation where lawmakers are having to really try to curb something like that from happening, it is one of those things that I think a lot of people have finally reached their breaking point with, where they've said, we just got to stop taking this money away.
Yeah, that's a good point. So what's the solution? What's going to happen? Now you can get in the prediction business.
So this year lawmakers agreed to reduce that number of transfers of gas tax by $125 million. And that's a lot of money. That's a good amount of potholes you can fix. So that's this year. Now, there's still going to be about $375 million that they have to wind down. It's going to require more money to be spent out of our normal tax money, the sales tax, income taxes, to replace that money at the state police. So there is going to be a revenue problem. Lawmakers are going to have to find a way to get more revenue to solve this, whether it's, putting a fee down on state, municipalities that use the state police, or just, there's just an agreement that we're going to need more money, but I think that's what's going to be kicked the can down the road.
You agree with that? Go ahead.
Oh, definitely. And I think the other thing, too, that plays into this is electric vehicles.
Good point.
We already have lawmakers that are looking at what kind of fee can we charge an electric vehicle user to equate to what they would pay for a gas tax. I think the big question right now is sort of down the line. We're not going to get as much money out of the gas tax. We've got the issue with funding state police that's still going to have to be addressed. I think they're trying to stop kicking the can down the road, but I don't know that we're quite there yet.
Yeah, look, over the years, this has proven to be a very tough issue to resolve.
Yeah, and I think, obviously Governor Josh Shapiro ran on trying to fix big issues.
Right.
I know that the split General Assembly sometimes presents interesting opportunities for coalition building. And even when there's all Republicans, I mean, transportation, everybody has to drive a car. Everyone wants to get to work. Everyone wants to hop on a train and get someplace,
Yeah, you're right.
So I think it's one issue that everyone's like, okay, we should actually solve this. But if they can do that, well, that's a heavy lift.
All right, thanks for the update. All right, coming up, teacher shortage. It's everywhere in the state of Pennsylvania, and it's a huge issue, and we'll get to that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Welcome back. Well, I'll tell you, the teacher shortage is a very serious problem, and its dimensions are growing, and it will affect not just the folks in the classroom today, but the future of learning and many aspects of our society. Joining me to chat about that is Rich Askey. He's the president of the Pennsylvania State Education Association. Obviously, they represent the teachers throughout the state of PA. Thanks, as always, for coming on.
Thank you. It's a very important issue that we're talking about.
I was going to say, well, let's generally describe the teacher shortage. Then I want to say, what's the cause? What's the factor that's producing this?
Well, I entered the classroom in 1981, so I've seen decades of public education and all the issues that it's dealt with. I'm very confident in saying that this is probably the largest crisis I've seen in public education during my entire career. Mm-hmm. We have seen since 2012-13 to the 21-22 school year, the amount of certificates that were given for graduating seniors for their first year of teaching, it dropped by 73% over that time
Say
period.
that again, 73. You didn't say 7%.
No, I did not.
73.
73%. So this was a crisis that was building, and then probably post-pandemic, I would say that it's only become a larger issue. The fact is that we have young people, the amount of young people that are interested in going into the field of education is dwindling.
Yeah. Well, why are they leaving?
Why are the present teachers leaving?
Yeah.
I would say there's a couple issues. First of all, there's stress. The stress of it's a vicious circle when you have an educator shortage and they're running around covering this class and wondering if they have time to take a bathroom break. And then there's the issue of pay. They can go and get a job in another field and actually be paid better. The salaries in education are not competitive, and they need to be looked at and brought up. That's why we're asking for a $60K minimum salary for educators, but not just educators, but our support professionals. You know, there's a shortage of bus drivers, cafeteria workers, secretaries, paraprofessionals.
So it's all throughout
it's every level of
500
the public
school districts in our state.
And all 500 school districts are suffering from this.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I want to get to, well, what the effect has to be enormous in the classroom, and that's profound because we're educating students K through 12, and their education is extremely important to them personally, but it's also important societally, and it will have a profound effect on them, as I point out, and on the society and on the economy of our state.
And that's why I said this is one of the biggest crises crises I've ever seen in public education. Our students are losing academic opportunities right now because if there's not enough teachers, there are classes that are not going to be able to be held. Those specialty classes, perhaps in computer science or engineering, they're not the ability to give those students those opportunities. Plus, one of the mainstays of education is individual attention. So if you're sitting in an overcrowded classroom because of the educator shortage, then each student is not getting all the attention that they need and they deserve.
Yeah. Well, there's also a problem with teachers leaving the profession. I mean, when you look at it and break it down, you've got more people of color leaving percentage-wise than white teachers, which I think is really, really important. And it does have an effect on teachers who are left behind. Let's run to a break, and when we come back, let's get into that and some other aspects of the teacher shortage.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
All right, teacher shortage. There's also a problem with teachers leaving the profession, correct?
Attrition is a big problem, and it's a new problem. It's just we've just started to see it. There was a study out of Penn State where in 2021 it was at 5.4% was leaving. The next year it went up to 6.4%, and now this past school year, the 22-23 school year, it went up to 7.7%.
Wow.
So it's a rising problem, and I don't see it. I don't see a release valve for it.
Yeah. Now, teachers leaving are higher among people of color, correct? Teachers of color.
Unfortunately, and that's where we have a very big need. You know, we have probably about 37% of our students in public schools are students of color, yet we only have about 6% of our educator force are people of color. And we all know that all the studies show that students of color do so much better academically when they have someone that they can identify with in front of them. So it's a big problem, and we need to do more to encourage people of color to go into the field of education.
Yeah. And if the folks who leave, teachers who leave are really excellent teachers, that in itself presents another kind of problem, correct?
It does. Again, it all then goes back to the student and the opportunities and the attention that students need. They are looking for caring, qualified people to go into these classrooms.
Well, what needs to be done to correct the problem?
Well, as I said, we need to do something about the salaries because young people don't see that as a viable future for them, first of all. But then we have to get rid of the barriers to going into a university program. We need to look at a pipeline scholarship program, which was already passed by the House, and now we are looking to the Senate to create that. But the other big problem is that most other fields, when you do your internship, you get paid for it. But when a student teacher goes into a classroom for 12 weeks, they don't get paid. And on top of that, in most colleges, they have to sign a paper saying they will not work a part-time job.
Yeah. And there also has to be, I mean, given our society today, there has to be a lot of stress on teachers, given the nature of our society and all the changes that have taken place in the last couple of decades.
There absolutely is. I mean, just let's look at all the political attacks on teachers these days and how they're being scrutinized by the public. And frankly, I have talked to people who have left who said they had enough of that. And what we need to do is we need to turn it around, and we need to support our teachers and give them what they need and give them the freedom to teach.
But when they're left behind, the teachers left behind, it has to be an enormous problem on the teachers who, remain.
Again, it's a vicious cycle is what it is. What you have is then they have to step up. Those teachers who are still in the classroom, that's more students that are are on their caseload. That's more classes on their caseload. That means that they can't have this prep period. Instead, they have to go across the hall and cover a classroom that is in need of a teacher.
How many different ways can you say stress?
I can keep on going with it, and my members certainly can too. What really, Terry, they came back from the pandemic. They were so happy to be in front of their kids. They thought everything was going to be really great, and unfortunately, the stress only built up.
Yeah, and I tell you, in my humble judgment, as someone who spent decades in the classroom, this remote learning does not replace in-person learning.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We all know that the best place for a student is in the classroom with his peers and colleagues and with a good teacher.
There has to be other impacts on students in addition to the fact that I just don't think you learn as much online as you do, in person. Impact.
Yeah, well, you have to look at the social impact, first of all, that they're not with their peers, but also the immediate communication that goes on between a teacher and a student. That is only better when they're right in the room and sitting across from each other.
Yeah. We were talking about what it means with teachers left behind. I mean, they're often asked to do things, required to do things because there's no one to go into another classroom, which means preparations for the teacher, but also getting into areas that they may not be familiar with. Just because somebody has to take care of the class.
Someone has to be there in front of the classroom. That's right.
Yeah.
And you make a good point with the preparation that's required. And just think of the fact that while they're preparing, they have to prepare for that other class that they may not be specialized in. They're losing their time to prepare because they're taking the time out of their day from their prep period to cover that class.
Yeah. But it also has other impact on students. I mean, in addition to the learning, there's the fact that it reduces the amount of time that students can spend with a teacher, because the teacher has to run to do something else because of the shortages.
That's right. When I was in the classroom, it was often that a student asked to stay after, asked for help, and just wanted to check on something right after class, that 5 minutes between classes. Now they don't have that 5 minutes because the teacher's got to pick up their stuff and run across the hallway to cover another class.
Yeah, and there are other aspects to that, and that is that if you can't fill a teacher position, that means that students aren't learning what they should.
That's correct. What happens when you can't fill a teacher position? You might get a substitute in there who's really has the background to teach that topic. Might be a good person, might be good with classrooms.
Thanks. We're out of time, but great update. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.